What's up, Paladins fans? IHOLDSHIFT with you once again, and this is what's raging on the 5th day of the HRX PWC qualifiers. And I want to preface this video with another reclarification, okay? So, we've been noticeably hard on some of the teams, but here's kind of the thing. When I look at Paladins at this stage of the year, this is not a continuation tournament. This is not just another Paladins event. This is World Championships qualifiers. This is the last Paladins event of the year, probably up until the spring split happens in March or February. This is the culmination of an entire year. So when we're pointing things out and we're calling out people specifically, these things can't happen. If you're trying to get into world qualifiers, you're trying to get into the world championship, that has to be the goal, right? It's world championships. Everyone should be here wanting to win. And yes, some of these players are a little bit newer, some of these teams are a little bit newer, specifically PGS, but some of them aren't. So when you're looking at these mistakes, that's why I'm bringing those out. Now, today, we're going to be bringing more of a positive light because there was some pretty awesome Paladins being played today. So, again, if I offended you over the last couple of days, it's never anything personal. We're doing analysis here. We're trying to break things down and showing what's good, what's bad. And when we take a look at these things, you got to keep in mind that we still haven't even seen the 4 best teams in Paladins. They don't make these mistakes. When you see things like when Fnatic plays, they're punishing all of the open mistakes, and it's very clear. So when you see these kind of close teams that are close to each other making very big open mistakes that either aren't being punished or very openly are, that's the reason we're drawing that comparison. You want a show of, can this team that we're talking about or this player that we're talking about compete up against one of those top 4 teams that are awaiting the playoff bracket to unfold, okay? So that's the whole reason why we're being as hard on people as we are, all right? I apologize if I hurt your feelings, okay? This is a rage-worthy show. We're taking some hot takes. Let's start things off with Splyce versus Renegades. The PPL from NA showing up. We thought this one was going to go 2-1 in favor of the Renegades, thinking that their team play had looked really strong yesterday as they were going up against Mouse Sports, and when they came through, it looked like things were starting to click on all cylinders. We did give the benefit that, yeah, Splyce has played well. They definitely can make something happen, so we thought this one would be a close set. It would be a close set, but it wouldn't go a full 3 games. Let's get into it. Frozen would be the first map up, and there were a lot of really close fights to start off on both sides, with good execution all the way through. It ended up being, though, that the Ruckus on the side of Splyce would help peel off Xin, who was getting all over Ricotta in the very beginning. The very beginning of the game, Xin was in the back line, Moonchopper was doing a great job, Ricotta on Strix was not able to get the full value. Eventually, Ruckus would adjust his play style, help keep Ricotta safe, and it really then came down to what the frontline battle looked like. That would eventually favor the DPS output of Splyce. They would win this map on a close one. Second one up would be Ice Mines, and we saw a very spicy pick coming in late in the draft as Dredge would show up with just non-stop spam coming from the gun who's Shadow, who was controlling the Dredge that time through. It was really smart execution on the composition that they had. They were really patient. They let the spam kind of deal damage over time. And Renegades, they never really pushed the envelope to start a fight off. A lot of moments where it was kind of like, all right, there was one in specific where if you go back and watch the VODs, you'll see it. Renegades had captured the point, but they were having trouble pushing. They had a couple ultimates they could have used to open up the fight, but they just walked in, never used anything. Splyce never used anything. The spam won, and Renegades would just die. There were so many moments where they would just walk in, and didn't seem like there was really any kind of, what is our goal here? What are we trying to get out of this fight? Are we going to dive into the backline and try to force out some ultimates? Are we going to initiate the frontline fight and try to peel back some of these frontliners so we can win the fight? There didn't really seem there was much execution whatsoever. Splyce would win this one at a scoreline of 2-0. Which would bring us then to our next losers bracket game. This would be Kanga taking up against Cryptic, and I had thought that this was going to be a very good game. I thought Cryptic showed some really awesome moments from Uber Spady specifically, who was showing some of his PPL experience off in these kind of lesser matchups, and we had this one going 2-1 favoring Kanga at the very end of the day. We would start the day off on Splitstone. We saw a lot of Splitstone actually today. We saw a lot of maps that weren't very Drogos friendly, and we would see a Talus pick come out again here on Splitstone, trying to shred through the frontliners, and it did find some effectiveness when there were numbers or some pressure from the front line favoring this Talus to go off a little bit more. But overall, it was just a little bit too hard to make work on that map. There weren't enough routes. And again, Talus is defensively does not have a lot of capabilities because he's got nowhere to retreat back to. That's the biggest thing. He's a very offensive-minded character. And it was just too hard to make work. They had a Fernando Barrack to match up with it, who honestly, for the side of Cryptic, did not have the highest ultimate efficiency or effectiveness. Kanga would end up taking this one at a pretty convincing 4-1 scoreline. They were very smooth, very fluid, high value in their execution rate when it came down to utilizing ultimates. They positioned well, and they made Cryptic kind of fold under the pressure. We would then go to Frozen Guard, would be our second map. Again, not very friendly when it comes to Drogos maps. And it would be an Eevee for Cryptic and Uber Spady with a Vivian and a Ruckus and a Fernando. A very interesting comp. And to be honest, the whole comp was really based off of finding pressure and value out of the Eevee. Once there's numbers, you can turn your attention back to the point, you can shred the tanks relatively easily, and you should be able to win the fight. However, Kanga would make it extremely difficult to do that as they, again, continue to show great ultimate pressure throughout the entirety of the day. And honestly, they were playing a Torv and a Talus combination. And again, it's just not so great defensively. It turns into a flank versus flank battle. It doesn't quite go so well. And honestly, this game was very close at a number of different fights. These high execution comps where you're dealing with things like a Torv Talus, or you're dealing with things like an Eevee to pop off with no support really to push through. It comes down to how well does the team synergize together. At the end of the day, the Torv Talus was on the offense more often than not, so they would end up taking this map. But I want to show some of the instances of why this Eevee is becoming more of a pick. You can see here, the Fernando's trying to push forward, and when he does that, everybody turns around for Kanga. They utilize a Dread Serpent to peel him off, but all of that pressure, again, that was put onto focusing one target allows this Eevee to pop. Uber Spady's able to find a couple of nice low health pool targets, and he's able to make himself very valuable with a 3 kill. At the end of the day, though, they just still weren't able to win the frontline battle. It never came to be with that combination of that Vivian, Ruckus, Fernando going up against the Torvald Ashe. There's just too much point pressure when they had the Cassie and the Talus working the point. So it would end up going Kanga's way again. A 4-1 scoreline, it would be a 2-0 for Kanga. So we got the call correct without the map total. We would then transition over to the winners bracket where Fnatic would take on Virtus Pro, a battle of the EU PPL. And when we talked about this one yesterday, we mentioned that Fnatic is a very offensive-minded team. They want to be the playmakers. They want to put things in their pace and their control, where Virtus Pro is more defensive-minded, and they want to play a little bit more reactionary. Well, what to talk about on Serpent Beach when it started off then? Well, you want to talk about high execution threshold comps again. Eevee would come out, and they would show why their skill allows these full high execution threshold comps find full effectiveness. Absolutely disgusting play from Fish Echo. VP did look more willing to initiate in these fights, but they were on the back foot just the entire time. They never were able to set themselves up and really kind of catalyst forward, and this would be a 4-0 in favoring of Fnatic. The next map would be a Jag Falls, and we had a very interesting draft here as there was a solo Grok heal that came out with, again, a Torvald and an Andro when they were playing up against a Willow. And initially my reaction was, oof, this is not going to look good, because you essentially have to take Spirit's Domain to try to heal through that, and the healing output is just not that high. We would end up learning that there was some issue, potentially. This is just rumor mill. We had no confirmation, but apparently the time had ran out when they tried the last-second swap to a Meldamba, and the game just registered it as being a Grok. They apparently tried to request for a restart, but I don't know. I'm not going to put my opinion out there, but end of the day, if you're considering a Grok, but you know that you for sure want to go Damba, just highlight the Damba and switch to the Grok later if you really wanted to. Regardless, it didn't work out so well. The solo Grok got absolutely folded on, and it would be a 4-0 in favor of Fnatic, so they move on to the winners bracket final, sending VP down to the bottom. The second winners match game would be what we thought was going to be a good one. It was going to be Space Station taking on Armada, and both teams have shown some really awesome moments in team fights. Armada are more willing to full commit at weird points where, like, you don't necessarily say this is our all-in moment, but they make it happen. They're willing to initiate, and they do it all together. They looked really solid, where Space Station, they've shown a lot of strength being able to soft reset when fights weren't necessarily in their favor, and they turned the tides by counterattacking. I thought this was going to be a great game. It would end up starting off again on Splitstone, and to be honest, this entire match, we didn't quite, I think, get the matchup we really deserved out of Armada and Space Station. Armada would really fold on the drafts. They would take a Shaolin on Splitstone, which, yes, Shaolin is pretty decent on Splitstone, but they did it into a Makoa and an Eevee. which is like two of the biggest counters to Shaolin, because he can never use one of his abilities. As soon as you plant, you get hooked, or as soon as you plant, you get dove on by the Eevee and you get instantly bursted down. Again, SSG had a pretty high challenging execution comp, at least until the 10th pick came, which was the Shaolin. They would win this one 4-0 pretty easily. We would go to Serpent Beach next. Armada would take, again, kind of a pick where it didn't really feel like it fit. And Eevee was picked again by Space Station pretty early in the draft. And, well, Armada would take a Kinessa into the Eevee when Cassie was available. And again, Cassie, I still, and I might not be 100% right on this, but I still believe strongly that Cassie is the most anti-flank character that's out there. The burst from Impulse can immediately make an Eevee back up and immediately have to reset and get healed up, and it delays that dive for that much longer. They don't go that way. They go with the Kinessa, and SSG again with some great positioning, some great ult usage, and goodness, they end up sweeping through. And this is what I'm excited about for Space Station, and why, again, that very controversial opinion I had about Space Station versus Egos, why I look at Space Station and say this team is big, is that you look at the way this team plays, and they actually do work. They can do something against a Fnatic. They can do something against these PPLs. They have what it takes. They have all the tools in the kit, and they're utilizing them very effectively, where other teams just have not shown that capability yet. But before we leave this, again, my big question is, with how much Space Station has shown so far, can this team-centric, resilient team hold up against an actual formidable opponent? They have not played anybody all that great, to be honest. This was going to be the true test, and honestly, I feel like we didn't get a true estimation of how these two teams are at full force. I feel like Armada just wasn't ready to play, but here are the other wins that Space Station have had today. Mouse Sports, easy raw full stop. Egos, I still say that was an easy set for Space Station, even though there was that controversial Serpent Beach game. And then they play up against an Armada team that kind of throws in the draft. So we'll talk about the question of if they can actually take on a Fnatic when they meet him in the winners bracket. We'll do our predictions later. Let's finish off the day, though. It would go down back to the losers bracket, where SK would take on Big Egos. And we had this one going 3 games, and eventually favoring Egos because there were a lot of holes in SK's front line and a lot of very questionable decisions that were being made by SK. Maybe some of them weren't even being talked about, as there were a lot of very, very, very big overextensions. We would start off again on Splitstone, where SK yesterday looked so strong, playing a Fernando into a Torvald, Androxus, and Ashe. The draft would start off pretty similarly for SK. And Egos, I don't know if they did their homework, because they came in and essentially played the exact same composition that Sour Team did against SK. They would go Torvald, they would go Androxus, they would go Ashe. SK would have a Barrack who sat mostly on point on that inner edge, kind of close to the little step zone area, and Fernando would play inside. They would pull out a Vivian. They would have all of this pressure where they could just turtle up underneath. And again, what do you do against that as your Egos? You do absolutely nothing. They would be dominated on this map pretty easily at a 4-1. A very interesting game 2 would come up. Brightmarsh would start off, and SK would bring out a Maelstrom Grok against just an Inara, which initially I was a little bit worried about, because I don't know if that damage was going to be 100% confirmed, and the rest of the desk actually said the same thing, as where is the damage going to come from? They were making it work, though, because Big Egos, again, were not having great positioning. They had all these issues when it came to where they were going to set up, as they had the Inara pushing outside instead of going to point. Pretty hair hit on it so many times. This is so strange to see Inara not just going straight to point on Brightmarsh. So many synergy issues, the same ones that we saw versus SSG, would come back at the initial force. Take a look at this clip. This is what we're talking about. Inara would push out or towards that little apartment area, those little houses, and would go straight in. They would find the Fernando, which is a good pick. But after that, you need to get to point. They continue to push forward, and they realize, at least the Inara does, that, hey, I'm going too far. I need to go back to point. They would eventually start heading back to point, but William on the Ruckus keeps going forward. What are you doing? Without that support and that help, Inara didn't get as much healing as he needed, because they felt like they needed to heal up William, who was overextended. Everybody would die, and SK would retake relatively easy. You cannot make those mistakes. You can't. Fortunately, though, Big Egos must have blessed the gods that were comeback mechanic, because they got some huge gifts. Again, these point fights were looking just like that clip did. Everything was going outer every single time on Brightmarsh for the side of Big Egos, and then they would try to come back to point. But if they just stood on the point, they would have gotten these capture so much easier. They just wouldn't do it. I'm so confused on it. And these are the things that we were talking about over the last couple of days. They get the gifts, they come back from a 3-1, they make it a 3-2, and then they actually beautifully execute when it's 3-3 on the push. Finally, we see some signs of life from Eagles when it comes to executing as a team, and they would actually punish SK for a couple of their mistakes, and it would end up being a 4-3 favoring Eagles at the end. We would go map 3 then. Frog Isle is where we would go. SK, they would pull out a very ballsy draft. Again, they pull out a Torvald with the combination of an Eevee, a Nara, so very stationary front line, and I was sitting here thinking, well, this is okay if you take the Meldamba because Swift Spirits. They end up going Saris. Just a bold strategy, but they really wanted to enable Payan, and Egos, again, they make similar mistakes. The Eevee comes out, Cassie's on the table, they take Leon, which is okay. It's like, it does an okay job against Eevee, but I wish they would have taken the Cassie just for that extra burst to help make sure that the Eevee was not able to get as much healing in, not as much shielding available to him when he dives in, and they wouldn't be able to use the cooldowns as freely as Payan was. They do go Leon. Edgem had some incredible clutches where he really should not have clutched. It was like 3-on-1 situations. Somehow Edgem sneaks in the back line, cleans up 2, the respawns come in, and they get themselves going. But regardless, SK would finally start to hit some ultimate combinations off of great initiation from Payan. Edge would counter back hard, but it just wasn't enough. SK would take the set 2-1. So we've got ourselves set up for tomorrow, and we'll start things down in the bottom, which is where the majority of the games will go. Virtus Pro will be going up against SK in the bottom-sided bracket. This one's going to be pretty easy for Virtus Pro, I think. SK is still wide full of holes. There's still a very big disconnect between frontline and backline. Payan and Invocal are doing everything they can to keep SK together, but this train is reaching the terminal here. Virtus Pro, I think, takes this one at a pretty easy 2-0. I don't think SK stands much of a chance. They are doing okay, but I honestly think they're going to try to go to Splitstone. I think Virtus Pro is going to do the homework on how to beat the Fernando inside, and they're going to be able to do so relatively easily. So I got this one going 2-0. And on the bottom side of the losers bracket, we need to take a look at the Kanga versus Splice matchup first and foremost, as Kanga might have a long day, or Splice might have a long day ahead of them if they win this one. Honestly, this one could be a good game, but based on what I saw of Kanga taking on Fnatic and moving through Cryptic relatively easily, I've got Kanga winning this one at a 2-0 scoreline. I gotta give huge shout outs to Hades. I would say out of the 2 coaches that have really made moves this entire year, you'd think of Envy with Meta Pusher first and foremost, but the more unspoken one is Hades. He's made this team, which has lost 3 of its biggest components between himself, Josh Kent, and Diggy Dog, really start to show up, and I think they actually are able to outplay team-wise this Splice team. I think that Splice has a shot. They did show up, and they played well against Renegades, but I think that Kanga plays a little bit more centric. They're able to punish a little bit harder, and they know exactly, and they have the awareness to really maneuver around the map to make sure they put themselves in a good position to win a fight, whether it be a neutral capture point, but more importantly, how to win a push or a defense. I've got Kanga winning this one 2-0, which will put them in their second set of the game, if my predictions are right. They would be playing up against Armada second after Armada fell down. And again, I would initially like to say that Armada has a chance in this game. As the number 4 seed, I guess we'll say, coming out of the winner's bracket after what they'd shown, you would think that they would have an advantage and they were the better team. I think we saw some pretty gaping flaws today, though, with them not getting a draft that puts them slightly in favor or something that they're comfortable with. They completely fold and they get completely punished when they're trying to run away with these high execution threshold comps. I got Kanga having more flexibility and a deeper hero pool. I think Kanga wins this one 2-0 to qualify for LAN and put them up against Virtus Pro, which we need to do a prediction for this game too, because this would be the last game of the day technically, and we'll stay in the losers bracket before we go up. And again, I want to hit on what the format is. So this is just for the 4th and 3rd seeding. The loser of Fnatic versus Space Station will just secure the number 2 seed. We are not playing 6 or 7 games today, which I wish we could have seen, because I think there are some vulnerabilities here, and I think it's the most fair to give a team a chance to come out of the losers bracket to play, but that's the format and that's what we're to deal with. So this is for the 3rd and 4th seeding. Both teams will qualify, and this is going to be a good game. I think seeing Kanga having taken Fnatic as far as they did and playing so close to the level of Fnatic, I think this is going to be a 3-game set. I think Virtus Pro will pull out some things that will keep Kanga off their kilter when it comes to winning team fights specifically. I think the explosiveness that Kanga has in their potential wheelhouse is higher than Virtus Pro. I've got Kanga winning this one and winning all 3 games tomorrow. This one's going to go 2-1, I believe. Finish off, though, we got to go back up to the winner's bracket. We got Fnatic versus Space Station. How do you call this one? Space Station has looked good. But the fact of the matter is, like we mentioned, they have not played against anybody formidable. I think Fnatic's going to take the time, really look at some of the key components to why Space Station is good, and I think at the end of the day, Fnatic will have a higher execution comp threshold than a Space Station would, and I think because of some of those flex power picks where they are situational, things like an EV and things like potentially even a Dredge that might come through, I'm going to tilt that in favor of Fnatic. I want this one to go 3, but I think it's going to go 2. I think Fnatic wins this one 2-0. So as you have it, the top 4 seeds as I predicted here will be Fnatic number 1, Space Station number 2, and then you would have Kanga number 3 and Virtus Pro number 4. I will not be watching these games live tomorrow, as I will be doing a Call of Duty tournament call, but I will watch the VODs later at night. I do want to hit, though, again, we got to take a look at what our winning percentages were. We were 56% on sets and 62% on maps. The maps would actually not go super in favor of us today. A lot of maps that we had predicted going 2-0 one way or the other ended up being the opposite way, and a couple of 2-1s in there. We ended up bumping it 1% technically as we go 12 and 21 overall. We're at 57% on the calls for sets, and we're actually down to 61% on the map calls. So a very good day, I would say generally. I think you're starting to see, though, again, this is the end of competitive Paladins for these teams. You got to be playing for world championships. This is why we've been so harsh on some of the things we've picked out. We're looking for the best Paladins for the whole year of 2018. There's no chance to do it again. This is a culmination event, not a continuation after this. So you got to come to town with playing the best. And when you're looking at these teams, these 15 teams, you got to put them in the mindset of how would they go up against the top 4, which is why we've been so critical. So again, if I hurt your feelings, I'm sorry. I respect all of you guys in the community. I've loved this community for so long. I love looking at this game analytically. I just hope you take some value away. That's all I got, though. We'll be doing maybe a recap video. It would be Sunday, I guess, if you're interested in watching on the YouTube channel. But we will do a prediction bracket when it comes out for HRX Incomplete for DreamHack Atlanta. So make sure you stay tuned for that one. It's been a pleasure being alongside with you guys for all this time. I've been IHOLDSHIFT. That's been a very calm What's Raging. So long.